because, you know, it's a bit outrageous what has happened. 2.5 weeks, 30,000 in your building fund, you
And
know.
you bought this place.
Yeah. And the unity in the church about it has just been beautiful.
I mean, that's one of the things that you told me about. You said the impact on the church is one of the best things. Well, hello and welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name is Gavin Smith, and it's a joy to welcome you today to this administration, admin and ops podcast. We love talking about the work of ministry behind the scenes. And if you've been listening to the podcast, we've been talking a little bit about buildings to different people, and really excited to talk to Phil Swann today from Llanelli, who have just recently purchased the building. This is going to be interesting to hear back from you. Welcome to the podcast, mate. It's good to have you.
Oh, thanks, Gavin. Always great to meet and chat. Thanks
Yeah,
for welcome.
it's fab. And before we jump into our topic, and I'm really looking forward to hearing just the story of grace with this building as I've been sort of following it over the last few months. I want to tell you a little bit about our sponsors, Church Suite, and we're really grateful for Gavin and the team at Church Suite who have kindly sponsored the podcast. And if you haven't heard of Church Suite, then please go and check out their website, find out a little bit more about them. They are a brilliant administrative tool, a database with ranges of all sorts of different modules that will help you to function your church, or help you to organize things. They are just fantastic. We highly rate them, and know that they would be a blessing to you. So please check out their site and do that. Phil, you're nodding. Do you guys use Church Suite?
We do, and I'm sure
Yes.
it is great. What you said there's absolutely right. It's tremendous, and I'm sure there's a lot more to it than we're
Yeah.
using at the moment. So we're on a journey with it, but it's been
Yeah.
great.
It's great. And Gavin and I did a podcast a couple of podcasts ago, just talking about their new training suite and the way that they can support you to, how do I do this? How do I do that? And getting the most out of it. So yeah, we're the same. There's still so much to use and learn with Church Suite. So loving that. Phil, tell us about how the church is doing. This is quite an exciting and sort of daunting stage for you with the kind of purchase of a building.
Oh, yeah, it is daunting. I've got to be honest. There's some nights I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, what on earth is going on here?
What have I done?
Yeah, and then have to reframe all of that in the context of the Lord's goodness and faithfulness. Um, but yes, I mean, the last year has been
Yeah.
very eventful for us as a church, and I think not just in terms of the journey of purchasing a new site, which is full of massive potential,
Mm.
um, but it's what it's done to us
Yeah.
as a church, I think, and in terms of growing in our understanding of adventurous faith,
Yeah.
particularly, which is not reckless. It's based on biblical foundations, and it's been really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an awful lot to say.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to hearing more and more about it. I mean, you guys have a building in Llanelli, don't you? Which is some ways you've always felt as kind of not helped you to grow. It's fairly old, isn't it? But it's meant a lot to the church as well, isn't it, in terms of the history?
Yes, it has. The church here, long before I came to Llanelli as the pastor, under my predecessor's ministry,
Mm.
eventually, they met together. The Lord was in it, and they needed a building, and they purchased what was once the town synagogue.
Okay.
So we're often known in the town as, or the synagogue,
Yeah,
um, and it's actually a really nice building
yeah,
inside. I mean,
yeah,
it's quite attractive from a preaching perspective.
yeah,
It is wonderful because
yeah,
people are so close to you. The
yeah,
acoustics are great. It's lovely. So we got the sort of section where we would meet, say,
yeah,
on the Lord's Day, particularly on more formal meetings, and then the church extended it. They put a
yeah.
hall out the back and some office rooms and a very, very tiny kitchen. Um, but Gavin, it's interesting. My first Sunday here, which was January the 1st, 1998.
Mm.
Well, it wasn't the first, but it was the first Sunday in
Yeah.
January. I remember several things about that day. One was the weather was absolutely atrocious, and it was so bad that the wind blew the roof off a pub,
Oh
which
my goodness.
very significant. It's the arrival of my ministry in Llanelli. But but the other thing amongst them, I remember the ministry that day. But the other thing I remember standing in that pulpit,
Yeah,
and we have a gallery. It's
yeah,
interesting because it was a synagogue. It's
yeah,
small, and it's designed to keep women and children separate
yeah,
from the men.
yeah,
So I remember looking out on the congregations they were singing, and it was just a tiny sprinkling of people, probably less than half a dozen in the gallery,
yeah,
but really feeling in my spirit before the Lord, Lord, this is going to be too small for what
yeah,
you have here.
yeah.
And that could sound very arrogant, but it was something very deep within me.
Mm,
And it
mm,
was the second time that day that I think the Lord really spoke into my life in what I realized that was quite an unusual way. That the first time was going down the M4 in that atrocious weather, because we were living in Bridgend at the time, and seeing the sign for Llanelli and just feeling
yeah,
this huge emotional attachment. These are my
mm,
people.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
it was very, very moving and very, very wonderful. But I also felt that the building's too small. So that was 1998.
yeah, yeah,
So you can imagine how it's been. Well, the old, we've had this sort of dog tooth pattern in
yeah,
terms of attendance at church. Numbers would pick up, we'd get uncomfortably full. We were limited in what we could do in so many ways. But then, you sort of hit a ceiling, and then you'd
mm,
find, for whatever reason, you'd lose people, or
yeah,
people would naturally drift off through moving away, or maybe through people passing
mhm,
away,
mhm,
and it wasn't being replaced. So it
mhm.
was a sort of a dog to sawtooth pattern
Yeah,
which was
yeah,
emerging, which I found was quite frustrating. And I hadn't been here that long when I realized how influential a building can be
yeah,
to the actual life of a church.
yeah,
And once you start talking about, well, we need to look for somewhere bigger, um, that starts to throw up some interesting things.
yeah,
And understandably, people who've massively invested emotionally in
yeah,
the original building gave sacrificially to purchase it, worked practically on the building, was
mm,
renovating it, and
mm,
went through the actual purchase of the synagogue was quite remarkable as well. So it's very difficult for people who've invested then in that
yeah,
way to start to think of, well, we may need to move out from here.
yeah,
And I think pastorally, then you have to be very patient with people
yeah,
and not be bulldozer the thing through.
yeah,
Because, of course, at the end of the day, it's more than just looking for a bigger building. It's working with people's sanctification and their sense of priority
yeah,
in their life. And that's the most important thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, and I think a lot of churches, yeah, they do, yeah, struggle with moving on from the history of the place. I've been to some churches recently, 1805 or 1800s back, and they've got this beautiful building, but they are growing to a point where
Yeah.
they don't have that people talk about that kind of 80% rule, don't they, that you need a
Yeah.
bit of space for people to kind of come in and be able to
Yeah.
participate and be part of it, and they were kind of running out of space. And yeah, those are really tough conversations, aren't they, to move a congregation forward. And it does take a bit of courage, doesn't it, as a leader, and some vision, isn't it, as well? And we don't tend to use that word very much, do we? Vision.
No.
But to move from one site to purchase a new one,
Yeah.
how did you lead through that, Phil? Because the gospel's crucial, isn't it? And people saying, well, what are my preferences? What of our history? But actually, what is God going to do in our town and our
Yeah.
church? It's yeah. Give us a bit of background on that.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. We sort of I had moments in the past where I felt, yes, we're moving in the right direction
Yeah.
here. We had to have some renovation work done on our buildings, basic decorating, really.
Mm.
So we hired a community centre, which was
Yeah.
just around the corner. And interestingly, back in the day, it had been a chapel building,
Okay.
but
Yeah.
was just used now as a community centre. And we had 3 Sundays there. And I just thought it was great. I felt so liberated in my preaching. People didn't know where to sit because they normally, so everyone was suddenly all mixed up and talking to each
Yeah.
other. And it was just fantastic.
Yeah.
And so I thought, here we are. This is the way ahead. So we wrote to the council and said, look, we've been greatly blessed by this.
Yeah.
We we'd like to meet here every Sunday.
Yeah.
And I can remember where I was in London, in South Kensington,
Yeah.
and I had a phone call from our then church secretary telling me that they'd had a letter, or it wasn't even a letter. He'd had a conversation with someone from the
Okay.
council who said, "No, you can't do that. We
Okay.
can't let you just have it every Sunday." Of course, we found out afterwards there was a rhythmical gymnastics club,
All right.
and they often had competitions on a Sunday, so they weren't exactly on my Christmas card list after. But Gavin, I felt so down about that because I
Yeah.
felt it was almost like we glimpsed the promised land
Yeah.
and this is the
Yeah.
way ahead and there's momentum and those 3 weeks, it was just 3 weeks, but it was so positive, but
Yeah.
back to square one. So I think for me as a leader, the big crunch thing for me though was whether or not we're an inward looking church or an
Mm.
outward looking church.
Yeah.
When you're an inward looking church, you can have a building that's uncomfortably full. Um, and if the attitude of people who are regularly there is to visitors coming in, well, there's still some seats at the front.
Mm.
You can sit there. You've got real
Yeah.
problems. An
Yeah.
outward looking church begins to recognize that today, if someone's going to turn up at church or come with a
Mm.
friend, it's a huge step.
Mm.
And they need to feel free to
Yeah.
not find themselves sort of scrunched up between people in a compact building.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it became really a gospel issue
Yeah.
that if we are really outward looking, we need somewhere bigger just to make it easier for people to come and hear the gospel. And coupled with that, then, with the things we were trying to do to connect with the community.
Mm. Mm.
And of course, if you're a church and you've got a decent kitchen and you've got facilities, food is a big thing
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah.
Well, we've literally got a kitchen where you can do tea and coffee and toast. And
Yeah.
so I think it was rapidly becoming for me a
Yeah.
gospel issue. If the church here is going to really expand and develop
Yeah.
the priority of the Great Commission,
Yeah.
we need an environment to work out of,
Yeah.
which is more sympathetic and sensitive to that.
Yeah.
So interestingly, for a while we met in a local school where I'm a governor, and a very very nice school. It's sorry, the headmaster actually is just ringing me.
The time of that is great.
Oh, you'll have a good laugh at that. Um, but they were incredibly welcoming to us as a church there on a Sunday morning.
Mm.
It was a lovely brand new 14 million pound plus
Wow.
building, and that went well because we had more room, and we were grateful for that. But we knew that was a temporary thing. And interestingly, with the school, the head said to me one day, "Well, what can you offer us?"
Mm.
And we worked out we had 18 people in the church who either had been teachers, were
Yeah.
teachers, or working in a school,
Yeah.
teaching assistant, administrator. And we all got together and said, well, what are our skills? Because he said, well, I'd love to see children from this part of Llanelli, which is a very deprived part of
Mm.
Llanelli, here on a Sunday. They can come to your Sunday school. I'm not so bothered about that. He said,
Yeah.
I'd like them here having some lessons
On
from the
Sunday.
community. So we got this all planned, and we had it set up that
Yeah.
for this particular Sunday where
Yeah.
they come, church would be there, opportunity for children to come, part of our
Mm.
Sunday club, but there would be these lessons sort of around lunchtime, and we were really excited and thought this is going to be great. And that was the very week Boris Johnson locked the country down.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
And then
I do. I remember you telling me about this before. Yeah.
we were just, well, what is the Lord doing?
Yeah.
strange providence. It's hard providence.
Yeah.
And quite rightly, Command Council for a long time, Education Authority for a long time was saying only school activities on school
Yeah.
premises.
Yeah.
So that one has sort of fizzled down,
Yeah.
really. And it is something we sort of wonder we'd like to revisit.
You touch on an interesting point there, isn't it? And I wonder if there's people listening to the podcast who, where they do hire buildings, how much more difficult that is becoming, whether you have to sign up to, an all inclusion sort of basis and sign up to certain policies, which are hard to do sometimes when they, contradict scripture. So
Yeah,
so much that venues, and finding a venue that's not just you can book but supportive of what you're doing and some degree flexible to run what church looks like on a Sunday, that's getting harder, isn't it? I think, and I guess that's why there is a drive from leaders to say we need to find a dedicated building or a dedicated space that takes away that the hassle, which you can imagine, can't you?
yeah.
um and Yeah, it is challenging.
And you're absolutely right. And I think if the trajectory we're on in terms
Mm,
of the secular culture
yeah.
that the Lord in his providence has placed us in, if that trajectory continues,
Mm,
it is going to be having a place of your own is going to be distinct advantage for the
yeah.
gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It is. It really is. Um, so tell us a little bit about the kind of. I know you'd always been on the lookout for a premise because of your heart and your experience and what you've shared to us already on the podcast. You are always looking, and I know people in other places will say to me, "Look, Gav, what do you think about this place? Could you imagine something like this happening?" And when you do find something, you have to move quite rapidly, don't you? In
yeah,
terms of trustees, in terms of like the money to pull together and how you're going to do this.
yeah,
It's a bit of a whirlwind, isn't it? In terms of the pace that comes from once something becomes available. That feels like it was certainly the case with you guys. I remember ringing you once and going, "Are you okay?" Because you must be in a whirlwind here.
yeah.
Tell us a bit about that.
Well, you're absolutely right. We looked at lots of play. I think we looked at pretty well everything going in Llanelli um, over the years, and obviously people say there's such and such a chapel building, and we looked at them. There
Yeah,
was one we looked at, which is right bang in the town centre. Location is stunning. And the Presbyterian Church owned the building. I think they were willing to let it go for a very attractive price. But
okay.
our view at that time was, well, if we get it, we'll knock it down and we'll build it that really engages
Yes.
the community. I have a friend in planning here who's a Christian. He said, Phil, this is a wonderful idea,
This is
but
it.
I have to tell you now, it will not get anywhere because it's regarded as it's not listed,
Yeah,
but
but it
it still
means
will
something to
be.
this town.
Just
Yeah,
raise a hammer in that direction and it'll get listed straight away. So we abandoned that. We looked at other. We very nearly bought a pub
yeah.
which was across the road from our building, and we put an offer in, but we were slightly late getting the offer in,
Okay.
and we were beaten to that by a property developer. And yeah, we looked at an Indian restaurant at one time. We looked at all sorts of things. We talked to Straddy Estates here in
Yeah.
Llanelli because the guy at the time who was heading that up was a lovely Christian brother. And
Okay.
was it possible they owned a bit of land in the town? They didn't
Yeah.
realize that maybe we could
Yeah.
relieve them
Just
of.
donate. Yeah, that'd be nice.
But what happened was basically a year ago now, it was a Sunday morning. I was in my study preparing for ministry, and probably because it had run on so long, maybe twice, three times a year, I would Google commercial properties in Llanelli. I was like, just had a quick look. And what came up was very familiar to us because it's only probably about 100 meters away from our existing place.
Yeah.
But it was the former town police station, which
Yeah.
is a divisional police station, a colossal site by our standards anyway, three-story building.
Yeah.
parking, masses of parking for about 50 cars,
Yeah.
4 interlocking garages and a 2-bedroom house.
Amazing.
And so I wrote to my officers that day and said, look, sent the advert from the estate agents through. So what do you think? They said, well, we ought to have a meeting about this. And, as we always do. But we haven't got very long because offers need to be in. At that point, I think it was approximately 3.5 weeks.
Oh, wow.
So we went to see it the following Friday. We arrived there. There was probably about a dozen other interested
Okay.
agencies crawling all over the building.
Yeah.
And again, in the Lord's providence, there was a Christian builder who's built over 150 church buildings from the
Wow.
Midlands, happened to be in South Wales, friend of one of our church members, a very good friend. And the chap mentioned it to the builder from the Midlands. He said, oh, I'd love to see this. Came over, and his eyes just lit up when he
Oh,
saw it.
wow.
He said, let's get it, he said, and knock it all down. And that was our thinking, that's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
So we wrote to the church. We put out every week anyway a
Mm.
pastoral prayer letter with a kind of pastoral devotional and then what's
Yeah.
happening in the week, and that explained everything we knew as officers. We don't know where we are on this, but let's pray. So we called the church to prayer on several nights, which were quite interesting times of prayer.
Mm.
And our prayer was very much, Lord, not really, we want this place desperately, please give it to us.
Mm.
Our prayer was, Lord, stop us as we pursue this, if
Yeah.
this is not what you want.
Yeah.
So our great priority was what does the Lord want here?
Mm.
And honestly, Gavin, the whole process was like leaning on a series of open doors that
Yeah.
just fell open one
Yeah.
after another after another.
Yeah.
People started giving money. Um, at that point, we only had £30,000 in our building fund, and that had been going for years.
Yeah.
And I learned a big lesson there that unless you've got a project, a specific project, people just by and large don't give. And I can
They need
understand
some
that.
vision. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
the vision was think what we could do here.
Yeah.
Um, Built on the fact that the work of God's work amongst us is in danger of being, if you can use theologically this terminology, I'm not sure really you can, but you'll guess where I'm coming from, that the work can be hindered
Mm.
merely by a pile of bricks, a building.
Yeah.
So that was the thing pushing this. But as I say, people gave, and incredibly, we've got a little letterbox out on the side of church. I remember one Sunday morning opening it, and there's just a pile of letters in there. There's about £15,000 have been given
Wow.
to us by different people who've never been in the building, never met
Wow.
with it physically,
Wow.
but would appreciate the online ministry.
Oh, wow.
So
You
we
started
got,
seeing God provide in different ways then.
well, it was incredible. And people I know in real financial, situation is tight, but actually giving, it's almost the widow's mite. It wasn't the amount.
Mm.
I remember being profoundly moved by somebody who gave a relatively small amount,
Yeah.
um, but I knew the context that
It's
had
just,
come from.
yeah, it's
And that to
costly.
me,
Yeah.
I kept myself as a leader, actually, having said that, I kept myself distanced from the financial side. We were very careful to say if you donate or if you promise to give or whatever, that will be kept absolutely confidential.
Mm.
So we were very careful to ring fence that. It's just occasionally, as I say, some stuff did come
Yeah.
my way. Yeah, and we had in the end, from when we spoke to the church, 2.5 weeks to put an offer in. We met that night, the night before the offer should go in as officers. And even as we met, money was coming in that meeting. It almost got to the point where it was almost funny what was happening, with joy
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
delight, not
Yeah.
funny peculiar. It was just
Yeah. Yeah.
fantastic. And we weren't sure then how much to offer because the agreement was best and final offers. So
Okay.
you don't know what anyone else is offering.
Yeah.
And then one of my deacons said, look, every penny the Lord's given us is for a reason for this project. Let's offer every penny.
Okay.
So we put this offering. I can't say what it was because
Yeah,
that's
yeah, it
an
does. Yeah.
agreement with Dover's Powers Police. I can tell you it was very generous.
Yeah,
The Lord is very generous. And I
yeah,
think we put a small business plan in,
yeah.
basically. So we said, well, this is what we've done. This is what we're currently doing as a church. And this is our heart for the
Yeah,
future.
yeah,
And central to that is very much connecting with the community,
yeah,
ministries of mercy
yeah.
that serve the work of building bridges that
Hmm.
ultimately we trust
Yeah,
the good news of the gospel can
yeah,
flow.
yeah.
So yeah, we had about a 2 week wait where we didn't know what was happening. And I thought, oh, one Wednesday morning, it was my day off. I thought I'll ring the estate agent. And she said, oh, you won't hear for ages. She said they have all these processes they've got to
Yeah.
go through. And about 20 minutes later, she rang me back and said, oh, you've got it.
You've got it. Wow.
And it was extraordinary.
How did you tell the church then? I mean, that
Well,
must have been something else.
yeah, I think we put it on the WhatsApp group to start with. It just
Yeah.
exploded with delight.
Just praise and delight.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and when we called the church again very quickly, I think it might even have been that evening.
Oh,
Let's get
really?
together and give thanks. And we that's what we did. And we're very mindful the Lord has given us this,
Yeah.
and He has a plan, He has a
Yeah.
purpose. Because it's a bit outrageous what has happened. 2.5 weeks, 30,000 in your building fund. You
And
know,
you bought this place.
yeah. And the unity in the church about it has just been beautiful.
I mean, that's one of the things that you told me about. You said the impact on the church is not is one of the best things. And not getting the building, just
Yeah,
seeing the church pray,
yeah.
seeing them trust God, seeing God's provision as just revitalized the church in a way.
It's really affected deeply some people, some of my officers, particularly in a most positive way, and seeing people step up. And we
Yeah,
actually had an evening of Thanksgiving as a church where
yeah, brilliant.
we had some nice cake and some coffee, and that's the best we can do with our kitchen and our current one. And we just told the story. We said,
Yeah,
you need to all know because a
yeah,
lot's been going on behind the scenes
yeah,
that we haven't been able to say very
yeah,
much about. Um, so we let's just have an evening where we
yeah.
do this. And one of the things I shared with the church, and I told this to my officers first of all, I said, I don't know if I should tell the church this because I don't want them thinking that in some way this is connected as to why we got the site. Um, and I said, I don't know whether to tell them. And they said, no, you should tell them this. And what it was the night we put the offer in, we
Mm.
had to be in by 5 o'clock on a Tuesday. So I remember at 5 to 5, I had all the email and everything. And I was there with my finger on the mouse, ready to hit the button and then hit it, and thinking, well, Lord, there we are.
Yeah,
And that night we met to pray as a church again about it again. I went home and we needed some food. We hadn't eaten
yeah,
and needed to get something. So I got in the car, drove over to Asda's, happened to have Premier Radio on,
yeah.
and it was Charles Stanley, who's an
Right.
American guy, and he's a good, faithful brother over many
Yeah.
years, opening up the scriptures, and he was preaching on adventurous faith.
Interesting.
And I was thinking, wow. And I was listening to this, and as I was driving over, and he talked about Peter getting out the boat, and he said, you hit situations where you know you've just got to go. You've just got to
Mm.
launch out. And it's right because it's based on these biblical principles.
Yeah,
And for us, this is what this has been. This is about the Great Commission.
yeah,
This is about the glory of God.
yeah,
It's about pushing back against the oppressive darkness of
yeah,
empty secularism in this town and brokenness
yeah,
through, it's a town which has just been badly overlooked in
yeah,
Carmarthenshire.
yeah,
Put down a marker for hope and grace
yeah,
and love, and above all, for the Savior.
yeah,
And I was listening to this, and he said, "You, when you launch out like that, there will be massive consequences, but you leave those with God."
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
thought, if we get
Wow.
this site, how on
Yeah.
earth are we going to have any money to do anything with it?
We'll
I
just
still
own
don't
it.
know.
Yeah.
I came back and I drove past the police station. It was dark and it was raining.
Yeah.
And I did something I've never done. I got out the car and I thought, I'm going to pray over this
Yeah.
site.
Yeah.
So I stood there just quietly by this little dwarf wall that goes around the outside big area.
Yeah.
Started praying. As soon as I started to pray, it was as if a door had opened,
Mm.
and it was like prayer was just like the easiest thing in the world. It
Yeah.
was like, and I felt I was being egged on.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can describe it.
Yeah.
I felt I was being cheered on.
Yeah.
And so much so, I just walked around the outside. I'm not someone given to this sort of thing. I just walked around the outside praying. And I remember
Yeah.
one guy was coming down the street looking at me, said, "What on earth is going on here?"
Who is this guy?
But my prayer became more and more specific. Lord, give us this site
Yeah.
for your
Yeah.
glory,
Yeah.
your name, your
Yeah.
honor.
Oh man.
And as a church, we believe that's happened. So we're looking forward to what the Lord's going to do with it now.
Yeah. And this is just the kind of start of that adventure, isn't it? And I mean it's exciting, isn't it? Because we know God's faithful and we know God is full of the resources, and to have a church like yours in the center of Llanelli to serve for the gospel is going to be such a blessing, isn't it? For generations upon generations.
Yes.
People will come to that place and hear the good news of Jesus.
Yeah.
Um, it's great, and I love the fact that church buildings start with vision, and yours is about this reaching the lost with the good
100%.
news. And yeah, that's what it's about. There's nothing spectacular about these buildings. We don't want just fancy
Yeah.
buildings for the sake of it. It's about using it, isn't it? Using the space, using the context
Yeah.
to tell people about Jesus, and to also, like you say, food's a big part of it, but being able to demonstrate, isn't it, what the good news of the gospel is, isn't it? Welcoming people and
Yeah.
having hospitality and fellowship together. These parts are the space that we need in the building to do that. And mate, it's exciting that you've been involved in this right at the start.
It is. And quite an interesting thing. The day after we put the offer in, the estate agent rang me. She said, you haven't put any conditions down. And I said, well, no. She said, well, what about outline planning permission? Or,
Yeah,
"No, we haven't got any conditions."
yeah,
And she said, well, are you really sure? I said, no, yeah, no. What we know is we think the Lord wants us to have this, and
yeah,
we'll sort all that stuff out afterwards.
yeah, yeah,
And it was sort of silence down the phone. He said, okay, you're
yeah.
sure. But I think that is our thing now. We've got the site. We've
Yeah,
started to think, how are we going to use this? Initially,
yeah,
it was, do we go for demolition and new build, or can we work with what's there?
yeah.
We've taken advice because, you know, I'm a theologian. I'm not a builder. My
Yeah,
wife, I'm not even a handyman.
yeah.
So I was fortunate. I teach on a theological training course, and one of our students is an architect.
Okay.
I
Oh,
said to him,
brilliant.
project, he said, he's up in Yorkshire, and he said,
Right.
I would love to come and see this.
Um,
So he came down, he met with us, and he
brilliant.
really opened our eyes to how you approach
Yeah.
a project. And he
Mm.
he took us through some of the industry standard
Yeah.
uh, processes, and we were so grateful to him,
Yeah.
sort of helping us get our feet on the ground and
Yeah.
say, there is so much that could go wrong here. There is so much that could be extremely
Yeah.
distracting to you as a church,
Yeah.
particularly to you as a leader. There
Yeah.
is so much here that you need people
Mm.
involved in this who know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so he was very helpful. We also had input again from this Christian builder,
Mm.
who's a lovely brother, and he brought another Christian builder colleague, down to look at the site. They advised us. But eventually we were put in touch with a Christian architect in Cardiff
Okay.
who is actually president of the Royal Institute of Architects in
Oh
Wales.
wow. Oh wow.
Second
You
for
got
the second time.
someone who's quite experienced then.
He's
Yeah.
just a very capable architect
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
extremely good at what he
Yeah.
does and has worked on big community projects.
Yeah.
He does work with Cardiff University. He's lectures there. He's goes abroad lecturing.
Yeah.
He's, you know, so we decided we'll reach out to this fellow, and he came over and was just so positive when he saw the
Mm.
building
Mm.
and genuinely excited.
Yeah.
We felt for the same things we were excited.
Yeah.
And so what's happened now is that we've got to a place where he and his team are looking to produce a feasibility study for us
Okay.
now. And there's so much that we don't, that you depend on people
Yeah.
who work in these areas, who know
Yeah.
what they're doing, um, to help us with. So that's what we're
Next
involved with now.
steps. Yeah, it's going to be quite a big project management, isn't it, thing? But the
Yeah.
scope is huge. And I was saying to you earlier, just off the podcast, that we've seen churches who have taken over buildings and have worked on the first floor, and then they've just slowly gone up and just developed it as the church has grown and people have come. I mean, it's going to make quite an impact, isn't it, on the town, isn't it? Just the fact that you guys have purchased this with such an interest in the site.
Yeah.
This is going to be a draw for people to come and have a look.
Well, that's what we're hoping eventually. But it was fascinating in the early days because there was all sorts of rumor and speculation in the town as to, what's happening with the old police. We couldn't say a word.
Yeah.
We were actually in a clause with Dyfed-Powys Police that we
Okay.
keep stump. You can talk to your own folks in
Yeah.
a muted sort of way.
Yeah.
And that was great because it meant church people had to trust us as
Yeah.
officers because we couldn't say everything that was going on. But there were all sorts of rumors going around on Facebook, and the residents right by it, when they found out we had it, they said we're so relieved because
Yeah.
we'd heard it was going to be a nightclub. We heard they were going to put a load of migrant, asylum seekers in there. We'd heard it was going to be for this, that, and the other. It's
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
nightmare
Yeah.
scenarios. And
Yeah.
the idea that a church has got it actually has been really positive. And we heard actually from our architect friends that the quantity surveyor who he used, he brought him over
Yeah.
to meet with us recently, and the train he was on, he bumped into six gentlemen from Llanelli
All right.
on their way back from Cardiff. A little worse for wear, shall we say? They had a good time, a roaring time.
Yeah.
He just got chatting to them. This guy, the structural engineer, and he said, "Oh, well, I'm going to meet this church, these people." And they said, "Yeah, we've heard a church has bought it." Yeah. And they were actually very positive about it.
Brilliant.
So the architect that we're using, his foundational principle is community engagement in the
Yeah.
project.
Yeah.
So what he's saying is we want to hear from anyone and everyone. We want the ideas, what to find out, what the community thinks of this. And
Mm.
we felt as a church, we've got our core values. We know what we need as a church in that
Mm.
site, but there's a load of space there.
Yeah.
Can we look at developing things there or
Yeah.
something which will be good for the town and will help us serve the town and connect with the town? And so the feasibility study is really going to be digging into that.
Yeah. Mate, brilliant. You're going to be in a stage soon where you're going to need an administrator, or you're going to need a building manager of some kind, isn't it? It's
Yeah, and a few millionaires to come our way
and a few millionaires. Yeah.
with big pockets. But
Well,
yeah, you're
it's
right.
it's fantastic, and Phil, thanks for sharing that with us. I've been tracking it from a distance, just enjoying it, going, this is great. God's been so good to you guys, and like you say, this kind of adventurous faith
Mm.
and the courage that you guys and the church have gone on this journey is remarkable, with, motivated by the gospel, motivated by the Great Commission, and you just know it's going to be successful because there's grace all over it, isn't it? And that's it. Yeah, it's exciting to watch. So thanks for sharing your story, and for filling us in. And our listeners, if you've got any questions for Phil, you're a leader who's thinking, oh my goodness, how did you take that step, and would like to know more about the story and this testimony of the building, then please get in touch, and we'd love to connect you and love to serve you. And I know there's a mixture of both pastors and church administrators who are listening to the podcast, and just a really enjoyable story that has Phil to fill us in. So thank you. Just one last thing. We, as a church office, have been doing something called a check-in, and we're looking to learn and to grow and to find out how we can serve you better, not just on the podcast, but also on the website. What documents do you need? What support do you need? How can we help you with some operational review and policy procedure, all those kind of things? There on our website, you can access the check-in. It's a short questionnaire. We'd love to hear from you and just give us your feedback, and just to check in and see how things are going. So please take a look at that. There'll be a link in the show notes for that. Phil, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on the podcast. We love Phil, and we love the church in Llanelli, and it's great to have you on, my friend.
Well, it's been a delight, Gavin, as ever, to meet up with you, and thanks for your encouragement.
It's great. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time on the podcast. All right. Bless you. Bye-bye.